I'm still not sure why I had agreed to hike up Hill 861 at 6 a.m. with several Vietnam veterans, and if the rain, leeches, and razor-sharp elephant grass weren't enough of a challenge, I could only imagine what it would have been like with an enemy soldier hiding nearby. But I need to go back some 50 years to first explain why I was in Vietnam on Hill 861. It was in 1967 when I found out that the first kid from my neighborhood was killed in Vietnam. It was inevitable that my draft notice would soon arrive. It wasn't if, but when. And when it did, it planted a seed for this project.
Every time I go back, I want to engage myself with the culture so that I can see how they view us. And then I think about how we view them. I said to one of our interpreters, and I said, well, you know, the Vietnam War was pretty significant to us. And he goes, which war? I said, the Vietnam War. He said, I don't understand. And then the interpreter said, oh, the American War. That's the first time I realized, you know, that they don't call it the Vietnam War. We call it that. So anyway.
Listening to Kimo Williams talk about his interest in the Vietnamese culture reinforced the comments from a veteran I had previously interviewed. Several years earlier, I was producing a documentary film about Vietnam veterans who had children that had served in Iraq. Someone recommended a veteran living in Atlanta. I called, his wife answered and said, Arthur needs to talk to you. He's kept his stories to himself for 40 years. Months later, I was at Arthur's home, and after the interview, I constantly thought of one particular story he shared.
After everything was over with, we did our body count. This Vietnamese, he was like a sergeant. He had a book with him, and in it was some letters. One was a letter from this guy's wife, and the things that she was saying about missing him and the children. And he had written a letter that he hadn't posted to her. He was saying the same things that we complained about. He had the same feelings. But unfortunately, he never returned home to his family. Now I look back on it and I said, wow, they were just like me, trying to get home.
Arthur's insight made sense. Young men and women may fight against one another, yet share similar hopes and dreams for their future. My curiosity became an obsession, and I needed to learn more.
I've talked to a lot of North Vietnamese veterans we fought against, and as combat veterans, we're brothers in a very dark way. We understand each other, even though we're on opposite sides.
Johnson và Nixon không chi cả cái đống đô la đấy đổ vào cuộc chiến tranh này, thì chắc rằng đời sống của người Mỹ cũng tốt hơn. Và chúng ta ở Việt Nam, nếu không vì cuộc chiến tranh đấy thì cuộc sống của người dân Việt Nam cũng đã tốt rất nhiều trong những năm 60 của thế kỷ trước đấy rồi.
We are loyal to our country. We are loyal to our country until now. I am loyal to the yellow flag with 3 red stripes. And we never accept communism, no matter what.
I saw myself as both a soldier and a young man out of place, sort of melded together into one thing. So it felt unreal. Is my body really doing this stuff? Am I really pulling this trigger?
Every able young man in this country want to go and fight for the national independence and unification of the country. So I went.
And I wouldn't mind sitting across from somebody who did about the same thing I did, that was a platoon leader for North Vietnam unit. I suspect a lot of what we went through would be the same thing.
For me, as a child, you sort of, you got numb, you don't really have any feelings back then. It wouldn't help if you cry, it wouldn't help if you were just scream.
I decided to produce a documentary but made the decision to avoid trying to tell the complex history of the war. The idea came with some challenging questions. Would American veterans participate in a story that included the former enemy? Would South Vietnamese veterans look past the many years of animosity they have harbored since the war ended? And was it feasible to find and interview the North Vietnamese? There was only one way to find out. I traveled throughout the United States and Vietnam to record stories from veterans and civilians. While some still struggle with the past, most were reflective and willing to share their personal story. I was asked repeatedly why I was interested in the war since it ended so many years ago. That was a good question. I told them that I too was a veteran and that we can all benefit by understanding and acknowledging the humanity of one another.